Hi, I'm Whitney Espich, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Sarah Simon, a class of 72, on behalf of the MIT Alumni Energy, Environment, and Sustainability Network. We are a worldwide community of MIT alumni with expertise and interest in collaborating to solve our complex environmental, energy, and sustainability challenges for a sustainability future. EESN has been running these webinars since January, we're very excited about all that. And our main things that we try and do, we do a lot of information, and our website has a lot of that. And we also help support developing both online and local program events. Local has not happened much lately. We collaborate on projects that alums want to do to create a sustainable, thriving future. And so we have a lot of groups from around the world. Although right now it's 3 o'clock in the morning in Asia, so I think there probably aren't many Asians on. This webinar, like all of our webinars, is being recorded. We will be able to post the video and the slides. The slides will be available pretty quickly after the event today. The video takes a little longer to post, and we will today have questions and answers. This is a webinar. The chat is not open to you. We would ask you to please put any questions into the question and answer function there on the bottom of your screen. It's being Zoom. And let's see, that's most of it, because I want to launch into, oh, the other thing is, if you ask a question and you try to make yourself anonymous, it will not work. We have that is, you have to say who you are when you ask a question, otherwise it will not show up in our listing. So with that, I'd like to introduce our webinar for this webinar is Let's Decarbonize our Energy System. Bruce B. Wald, class of 81, is our speaker for today. Bruce has toiled in the field of understanding the electricity and energy system pretty much since he's graduated. He has a few other interesting hobbies, which I hope you looked up when we sent out the links. And I think with that, though, he's helped a lot of governments and nonprofits understand how the electricity rate setting and process has happened. Although, Ramon, please provide any other information about the bio, and then we will have Bruce talk with us.
I think you got the basics. This is Ramon from class of 74. The work that Synapse and Bruce have been doing has been very valuable for public interest and government clients. I think it's going to be a very informative talk show. Webinar. But I've also want to point out he's a co-host of this new Energy Nerd Show and Tell, which is a very interesting, entertaining, and informative discussion with interesting guests about particularly graphs, maps, and data that illustrate interesting and valuable points. And with that, we're passing it on to Bruce.
Thanks so much. So yeah, Bruce here. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm going to share my screen in just a minute. But I just want to say I'm really glad to be talking to all of you wherever you are. I went to MIT back in the late 70s, and back then I lived in senior house, and I washed dishes in Walker Cafeteria, and I did a lot of my projects with the architecture department out in, Tim Johnson had a crystal pavilion out in the athletic field then, which was a high-tech passive solar demonstration project. It was pretty interesting. So, that was fun. Ever since then, I've been working on energy consulting, energy problems. Let's see if I can share this. You should now see my screen, I think. There we go. Okay, so this is the company. So I've been a consultant since 1981, but I founded Synapse about 24 years ago, and we are a terrific group of people. We normally work in Central Square, almost all of us, and we've got graduates from local universities and, all over the place. And we are running the industrial strength models and doing a really rigorous analysis, mostly of the electric system and environmental policies. I think one of the things that's unique about us is at our size and with our expertise and mix of clients, we don't work typically for utility companies and power generators. So we tend to work for government agencies, state, federal, local. We work for environmental groups, public interest groups, commissions, consumer advocates, and occasionally for market participants. But we feel that this helps us really be able to call the shots the way we see it. So when we do modeling, we're looking at what we think is really going to happen. We don't have the kind of pressure that you sometimes get as a consultant from clients, to find a certain answer or something. So we basically are rigorously honest. I've personally testified in over 100 dockets and court proceedings as an expert witness, and my staff is in, we do over 100 projects a year. So we are all over the place working hard on exactly these issues. And that's what we looked like back at the end of last year. And now this is what we look like. We're scattered all over, working from home, but so far so good. So, you're on a webinar, you know what this looks like, Zoom windows. So the summary today, basically, I want to talk about how we can decarbonize the electric sector and the whole energy system in the United States. And the technologies are available, and there's a good track record in many ways. But there's a key challenge in that the electric system, and particularly utilities, are right in the middle of all this, and they don't have such a great track record. And so there's going to be a lot of hard work, kind of steering this big ship with a lot of inertia in it. There's a lot of work for everyone to do. So this is then from an IPCC report. Basically, I'm not going to dwell on this, but worldwide, we need to radically reduce our carbon emissions to basically net zero by 2050-ish. And, we could quibble about the years and the details. We could quibble about, or you got to figure out what is everyone's role, right? Different countries, different sectors, and so on at meeting this goal. But basically, with this kind of target, everyone's got to do everything, right? Everyone's reducing CO2. So I'd say I think about starting with electricity. In some ways, electricity is easier. It's a handful of big companies, a couple hundred big power plants that are responsible for a lot of the CO2. And so it's a good place to start. And I think it's relatively easy. And then after we've decarbonized that, or as we're decarbonizing that, we've got to transform the transportation sector. And then we've got to decarbonize buildings and industry and all those miscellaneous end uses and so on. And for the most part, I believe that decarbonizing those sectors is going to also lean on electricity. So then we've got even more electricity that we're going to have to provide as part of the decarbonization of those other sectors. So basically, electricity's got to do its own work cleaning up, and then it's got to provide a lot of low and zero carbon electricity to help those other sectors decarbonize. So, basically, historically, CO2 in the U.S. has been flattish for a while, and this is the EIA's projection back a couple of years ago. And it's going to be a big job to reduce to 80% or 100%, or maybe even a little more than 100%. So that's going to mean taking out all that. This is the current mix over on the left, and possible 2050s on the right. And we're basically going to have to get all the coal out of there. And in these scenarios, we reduce the gas, but really going to have to get rid of gas too by those, or else have it be zero carbon, and with a growing economy. So we're going to need a lot of renewable energy in the system, and that's going to be important. And then beyond that, we've got the transportation sector. So there's a lot going on in these graphs. So let me walk through them one at a time. But basically what I'm trying to do here is come up with a scenario for decarbonizing the vehicle fleet. And so let's say this line here, I think can you see my cursor? Or maybe now, my cursor? I'm going to assume you can see my cursor. Let me know if that's not the case, please. But so here, if this is going to be our carbon trajectory down to near, approaching zero by 2050, then we've got the light vehicles and the heavy duty vehicles, and we're going to have to get those down on trajectories like this. So this is the total carbon. This is the carbon from each of those two kinds of vehicles. Over here, we've got the market share. So this is the cars on the road of the light duty and heavy duty vehicles that would be consistent with this graph on the left. And then, but vehicles last for a long time. There's a capital stock turnover issue. And if they're on the road for, average of 15, 17 years, then that means the market share for sales has to look like this graph in the bottom left, where we get the light duty vehicles and the heavy duty vehicles cranking upward pretty quickly. By 2030, we got to have most of the new sales being maybe 2/3 of the light duty vehicles to be electric. And then over here, lastly, we got the energy. So associated with the same scenario. So this is not a magic scenario. It's basically a, what I consider a very aggressive, but plausible and necessary kind of scenario. And what it means is we got this, a little over 1,000 terawatt hours to do light duty vehicle electrification and a little under for the heavy duty, totaling about 2,000 terawatt hours. So then we've got to go back and look at the electric sector and get that energy, get that electric energy delivered there for charging these cars. We've also got buildings, right? Buildings, I think, are the toughest so far. And, here's the current 2018 mix of building space heating, energy use. Here's our electric resistance at the bottom, little tiny bit of heat pumps. This yellow is the natural gas, and oil here in blue. And basically what we've got to do is phase out the oil and the gas and replace it with heat pumps. And these heat pumps, because they're efficient, you use less total energy for the same space heating. But look at that, that's going to be a lot more electricity. How much more? Let's look here. Looks like for the two scenarios without the electrification, or just modest electrification and then aggressive electrification, it's about 500 additional terawatt hours of energy. So the electric sector is going to have to do that work also. So, basically we've got a sector, it's about 4,000 terawatt hours that have to be provided cleanly. And then we got these other chunks from transportation, another 2,000, buildings, another 500. And then there's other, the other things in there too that we haven't even talked about: industry, aviation, lots of miscellaneous stuff that we have to do. And I mean, it's oversimplifying. It's the bumper sticker version of what we have to do, but I think electrify everything and do it as efficiently as possible is not a bad motto. So anyway, so we're after, so I figure we'll pause for a second and then move on to these other topics. I'll leave this screen up, but maybe it's a good time if anyone does have a
Right. You mentioned that efficiency briefly in terms of changing that total load. What kind of work are you doing on that? There's one question here from Michael Mavrolinius, excuse me for my impression. Does carbon capture detract from the need for fast-paced decarbonization? So are the things that are going to make buildings and processes more efficient, and this talk of carbon capture, how does that affect this? Do you know much about that? Have you looked at much of that?
Yeah, so from what I've seen, carbon capture, at least in the US, basically taking the carbon from power plants, IGCC plants, and putting it in the into the ground and storing it for a very, very long time is basically wildly expensive. And so it just uses a lot of electricity itself. So it's using a lot of energy. And the track record has been terrible. So the projects, the two big projects on Indiana and Mississippi have been absolute disasters from an economic point of view. And I think even, so that's no model. If you look at even well-working, projects built without the overruns and operational problems, it's very far from the first thing that you would do to reduce carbon. So I think it's a distraction in the sense of diverting capital and attention to the wrong, expensive things. So, at some point, maybe it's part of the solution, but there's so many much lower cost things to be done to reduce carbon with technology that's available now, and and quite economic. In some cases, the clean technology is significantly cheaper than the carbon emitting.
Okay, good. We have time for another couple of.
I was just going to say the main place where I get a sense that carbon capture may have an important role to play is in that tough industrial sector, where, I'm not an expert on that either, but that seems like it's a tougher area to deal with, and that's maybe where it's more targeted, as opposed to transportation and buildings.
Okay, good.
Yeah, or
Let me
biofuels and hydrogen, perhaps.
Biofuels and hydrogen. The only questions we're taking right now is just about this baseline platform, about how much we need, and there were a couple of other questions. One is what is JDJMW asked, what's the total increase in electricity consumption from the baseline today of about 4 terawatts? He was eyeballing it. How much more do these models predict above 4 terawatt hours in a year for the US?
Yeah, so I think, it's going to depend on the model, and I wouldn't want anyone to take the numbers in this presentation too seriously, because this isn't a single analysis all based on consistent assumptions. But I would think that it might be 50% higher. If we do it inefficiently, it could be even higher than that.
Okay.
But I think in general, you mentioned, Sarah, efficiency, and I think that should be a part of this whole effort. And with energy efficiency and doing things in smart, efficient ways, I think we can keep it all in the manageable range.
That's great. And then the other questions here are, there was do you know, can you quantify, this is from Shayadamas Banerjee, can you quantify what percentage of greenhouse gas in the world has been contributed by the major oil companies, as opposed to your discussion about the electricity and demand?
So I've seen data on that.
You don't do that?
Yeah, I'd like to focus on the U.S. Really today, and what we can do here in the U.S.
Okay.
But there is data on that, both kind of current and cumulative over the last 100 or more years.
Right. So let's see, other questions. There was one more question about the way our infrastructure is now, which is about how to secure the electricity infrastructure. And is that part of your issue about decarbonizing, or is that just part of a question about can consumers expect that in the future we'll have a reliable system?
Yeah, so I would characterize the electric system in the U.S. as highly reliable, and it could be more so. We have outages with storms. There are also potential for we have extreme weather, then also terrorist attacks. We have cyber attacks. Squirrels cause a lot of outage, and the distribution systems. In general, I think the levels of reliability, resilience that we have today can be and will be improved upon as we move into this future. With more distributed resources, some microgrids, better controls, better information. I think as the utility system operators have better awareness of what's going on, instantaneously around the grid and with neighboring systems, that all improves reliability.
Great, very good. All right, so that's our phase one. Now Bruce will get into what I think is the fun part.
Okay, so what can we learn from the past? There's some track record, and the central role of utilities. This is going to be the key. And then what do we have to do to kind of get things in the right direction? I think SO2 and NOx are not as hard a challenge as CO2, but in the power sector, if you go back to mid 90s, well the 80s when we were talking about these issues, it seemed really daunting to clean up 90-ish% of sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides from the electric sector seemed really daunting. People thought it was going to cause all kinds of outages, shortages. We're going to have electricity prices doubling. It's going to cost a fortune. And it turned out that over about 2 decades, we made major reductions in sulfur and nitrogen emissions from the system, and it costed an order of magnitude less than the original estimates, and I think that's something to learn from. We did it with a lot of people. It was a lot of it was cap and trade under the Clean Air Act. It also related to, I think, some of the innovations were kind of getting lower sulfur coal from Powder River Basin, not relying so much on scrubbers and technology as changing the fuel mix. And but there we are, major public health benefits and environmental benefits from this, and I think it's mostly a win. We had this massive increase in so this graph is the changes, annual year-by-year changes in the electric capacity in the US by fuel type. And so here's the coal getting added back at megawatts of coal back in the 70s and 80s, a little bit nuclear in here. Recently you see coal going down. Every year there's some coal retirements and renewables going up. But this is the big thing that happened, right? It just jumps out at you. It's about 200 gigawatts of capacity that came online right around the turn of the century. So right around 98 to 2002, in just a few years, we made something like a $500 billion investment. When I say we, some of it's utilities, some of it's independent power producers, some of it's combustion turbines, some is combined cycles, but it's it's a big mix. But we really changed the mix of capacity in the country in that period. Now, a lot of companies ended up going bankrupt. There were projects that ended up selling nickel on the dollar. It was kind of a mess to do it in that way. And I'm not saying that particular rush to build new gas capacity itself was particularly sensible. But hey, there it is now. It can be used to even out variations in intermittent resource operation, and it demonstrates that we can invest a lot of money quickly in the U.S. This is the cumulative version of that exact same graph. So here's the cumulative gas over time, and it basically goes up 250 gigawatts just over this very short time period. Here you see the renewables increasing, and coal capacity has been retiring, particularly over the past 10 years or so. So that's all about capacity. Here's the energy mix. So this is the generation, the terawatt hours from these same types of power plants with the same color coding. So keep it simple for you. And we see the coal plants. You saw the coal retirements might have been about a third of the coal capacity, but coal plants are running less as well. So they're operating at lower capacity factors. So if coal generation fell about in half, some of that's made up for by increases in gas, and some by non-hydro renewables up here in yellow. So the system is changing pretty fast, and in some sense it's changing in the required direction. However, so now let's look forward though. And I work a lot in dockets involving utilities and utility planning. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is resource planning. And what we see in resource plans is utilities are not moving that quickly. And there's a lot of there's a lot of investing in old coal plants and keeping them running. And there's a lot of replacing them with gas. And I think that's just inconsistent with these long-term targets. So this is just one example. There are many, but a big company, Dominion Energy, has a goal of net zero by 2050. So, and then if we look here at the bottom part of this, with the dashed lines, here we see the current CO2 emissions, And this is 2040 here at the other end. And so this kind of path would be on a route to, you know, approaching 100% reduction, you know, 80, 90, 100% by 2050. But then what we do, so, and the company has adopted that as a goal, a stated goal. But meanwhile, when you go to the resource planning dockets, you see there's really not a lot of energy efficiency, and loads are increasing. There's some renewables, look at that. But meanwhile, also there's you know, a lot of gas and just a little bit of coal retirement. And virtually, you know, over the next 20 years, they're not really planning on changing a lot. They're, you know, they're adding in some offshore wind and distributed solar, but it's not the kind of thing. If a company really was taking the net zero by 2050 target seriously, they would be moving faster. They would be embracing energy efficiency and expanding renewables more quickly. They would be looking at flexible load aggressively. And also they would be starting to work on the other sectors. So in some ways, that's the big business model for utilities. They could provide electricity for all the home heating in their service territory. What about heat pumps? What about all that charging load for electric cars? Huge growth opportunity for utilities. And I don't see them embracing it in the way that I would, you know, if they were not regular monopolies, I think they would be more interested. Here's the efficiency summary graph. We have basically the yellow, the gray is what these particular utilities are doing in terms of annual efficiency savings. The yellow is if these companies were doing the US average, but the real thing, if you look at companies like in the Northeast and the West Coast, they're leading, you know, 2.5%, 3% reductions in sales. And so these blue lines are the potential if these companies that are lagging, which is really most of the electric utilities in the country, if they stepped up and did, you know, something resembling what we're doing in Massachusetts, say, in terms of energy efficiency programs, they would be saving much more electricity every year. And I think that's got to be a part of the solution. We're working. My team is working now on the regional avoided cost study to look at what are the benefits of the energy efficiency. And you know, it's really a great team in Massachusetts and New England around these programs and the collaborative efforts. And I think we've made great progress. Other places could learn something from the work we're doing here. So utility planning is really terrible. Utilities, when they do resource plans, you know, you'd think they're building a $3 billion IGCC plant, or you know, investing literally, you know, for a particular utility, you know, billions of dollars in projects, and they also have massive environmental impacts. And you know, you would think that they would make reasonable assumptions, be up to date, and you know, do a reasonable job of planning. And I find I've been looking at utility plans now for literally several decades, and they just do a terrible job. They make all kinds of sloppy, you know, mistakes. I think a lot of it is frankly biased. There's a question of you know, how much is you know, kind of errors versus, you know, negligence. I was talking with a group of industrial customers one time, you know, I have a presentation that is just about the problems in utility planning. And I went through a lot of the details and showed some of the examples of, you know, utilities investing, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars in this project, but they're using a 4-year-old commodity price forecast and out-of-date assumptions and the models, right? And one of the someone in the audience kind of, you know, said, well, yeah, of course, you know, but are they stupid or are they lying? And I said, well, I don't get into that, but there is this issue of, are they motivated? Are they capable? Are they motivated? Utilities are not innovative. They, you know, there's got a lot of inertia, and for various reasons. And the main reason that I'm going to talk about has to do with their rate regulation. So they're regulated monopolies, and they basically don't respond to the kind of signals and drivers that regular businesses do. They basically don't really manage costs of projects the way for-profit business, a regular, non-regulated for-profit business would do. They basically go to regulators, they have their prices set based on cost. If there are cost overruns on big projects, that can actually help the utility bottom line, as long as there's not a disallowance. So what they worry about is managing regulatory risk and avoiding disallowances in their rates. And this sunk cost issue is really at the heart of it. So did something there. So I think, so we're gonna talk more about sunk costs, but I wanna make the point that I don't think that there's, that utility planning is terrible. I think the implications of that are horrendous for the planet, for ratepayers in the United States, for all kinds of impacts. And I don't think there's like an evil person sitting at the middle of this making evil decisions. I think that there's a institutional arrangement, the structure of the way companies make money in this business is problematic. And I've got a few solutions to suggest, but let's talk about sunk costs. Normally, the sunk cost fallacy, right? Economists, you should ignore sunk costs. Take the position on the planning board the way it is and move forward. And if a cost is sunk, then it should not color and distort your future decision making. So, but in utilities, sunk costs are in some ways they're the main thing that matters to utilities. So here we got these entities, we're counting on them to be at the middle of this transformation of their own industry sector and to be crucial to providing the low carbon electricity for these other sectors. And meanwhile, they're all entirely focused on very much focused on sunk costs inappropriately. So what this means is they basically are keeping older power plants around longer than really makes economic sense on a forward basis. But they're doing that because they want to get cost recovery for the plant. Now, this is sort of an idealized, here's a 30-year asset, and this is from EPRI, and you got from year zero, you're recovering your recovery of and on, return on the thing depreciates over 30 years. And so, in this example, you build a power plant, utility builds a power plant, and over 30 years, they get cost recovery of and on, they recover their original investment, and then maybe the plant retires at 30 years. In practice, it's very different. So what happens in practice is, so this is the same graph, and I put in some capital investments here. So they're hypothetically, or illustratively, they're basically investing in fixing things, replacing economizers. You got your heat exchangers, you got some emission control equipment going in. And so what happens over time, the unrecovered plant balance might decrease somewhat, but it's still, there it is. It's still, 30 years later, sometimes the unrecovered plant balance exceeds the original plant cost. And then, you go out further and maybe it's half of the original plant cost. But the owner of this plant really does not want to retire the plant and have to reckon
I can't hear Bruce. Is that just me?
No, Bruce, we can't hear you all of a sudden.
Bruce, your sound is cut out.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you go.
Okay. I'm not sure what happened. Anyway, so the utility really wants to recover the costs, the strandable costs of these old plants, even though they're obsolete, they're uneconomic. In a lot of cases, the utilities are losing money on an operating basis by running these coal plants, and yet they keep them running. So that's the kind of incentive that has to be fixed. And how it should be fixed, it's really up to the regulators, because the regulators are the people who make the rates and review the rate filings and the plans. And regulators have to apply good utility rate making principles, and they have to be well informed. But frankly, they're overwhelmed. so regulators are, these are the PUC commissioners, right? And there's about 200 in the country.
Bruce, we lost your sound again.
So each commission typically has 3 to 5 commissioners, and they are making decisions where they're allocating hundreds of billions of dollars of investment capital and have huge impacts for the economy and for the environment and public health, greenhouse gas emissions. And they have really often not enough experience. They're overwhelmed. They've got to learn on the job. They are regulating electricity, gas, sometimes railroads and ferries and other things. And so commissioners need a lot of support. They need help, education. They need good staff, people working for them. They also need, in the dockets, they need interveners and parties in the dockets to make a good record. So that's a lot of what we do, is we appear in the dockets and we analyze the numbers and we give good advice where commissioners can trust us to explain what's really going on, where are the problems in the model, who in this docket is kind of biased or exaggerating or trying to pull the wool over their eyes to make bad decisions that aren't really in the public interest. And that way, if you have regulators who want to make the right decision, then they've got the record there in the docket to support their good planning decisions. One of the things they can do is incentive rate making. So instead of just saying, hey, if you build a plant utility, you get to recover the cost and a regulated return. But here's these handful of things we want you to do, like reducing CO2 emissions, increasing distributed resources and energy efficiency. And if you do that utility and you meet these goals, then we'll allow you to make additional profits. Or if you fail to meet the goals, then you'll make lower profits. So there's and at some level that sounds very simple. It sounds easy to do. Of course it makes sense, but it's really hard in practice, especially when you're so overwhelmed as a regulator and
Bruce, hold up a second because your sound is out again. I don't know if it's your Wi-Fi or what. There you go.
Okay.
I think I hear you.
Sorry about that. Utilities, the regulators should require utilities to use competition. And I don't mean retail competition like we do in some of the states, but I mean old-fashioned requests for proposals. So if a utility needs some capacity or it's thinking about some new resources, it should go to the market and say, hey, we want to buy power, 10-year, 15-year contract. What have you got? When Excel did that back here in 2017, they basically got lots of wind. Let me point you to right here is the key thing. A lot of projects, a lot of megawatts of wind and solar, including some with battery storage, all around $20 per megawatt hour. So these are real projects being offered to the utility at about 2 cents a kilowatt hour. And so that really competes well with other traditional resources. In a lot of cases, it beats the running cost, never mind the capital cost of, say, a coal or gas plant, but the running cost. So, in order to succeed, we
Wait, Bruce, we don't hear you again. Your Wi-Fi is not great. There you go.
Okay.
Try it again.
Okay, Bruce here. So anyway, so some of the things that can be done, a lot of places there are not really a lot of interveners. So like in Massachusetts, in a Massachusetts docket, you get a lot of involvement from parties, but in other parts of the country, the commissions don't really have a lot of people building a case and making recommendations, providing expert witnesses and testimony in the dockets. Another problem is that a lot of times the models are kind of private and secret, confidential business information and so on. And I think that a lot of that is, some of that might be justified. A lot of it is nonsense and really to make participation difficult. So I think there should be more open source models used and data available. So if utilities going to invest $1 billion on behalf of its customers in a certain kind of resource, then they should make that data available for people to review and see, is this, what are the implications, and is this really the kind of power plant that we want? I talked about using competition. I think that makes sense where you can. I think that there's a lot of details in rate making, but a commission that wants to roll up its sleeves and align the utilities, profits and financial performance with achieving predetermined and stated objectives, metrics. It could be around carbon, it could be around other things. We also need, so there's a lot of details. There's also, it would be great to have a broad, carbon price or cap to move things along and provide some price signals. And basically, I think in some ways we're in a mess, and there's a lot of blame to go around. And you can blame basically everyone involved, pretty much. But that means there's work for everyone, right? So I mean, the public should be be informed as consumers. Your choices that you make in terms of energy choices and efficiency technologies in your house and so on, and also as citizens and voting and participating in democracy and all that. Government, federal government policies are important. Also, a lot of it comes down to, state environmental agencies and PUCs. It's amazing how much the utility commissions really impact what goes on in this sector. The utilities, of course, right in the middle of everything. Private sector, where there are ways to bring in competitive forces to unleash a little innovation that the utilities might not be inclined to themselves, then that can work great. And then certainly lots of nerds, lots of energy technical people and planners and engineers have a lot of work to do. So I just want to show one kind of, in some ways, a happy note. This is basically CO2 from the U.S. electric sector over the last 15 years or so. And you might remember the Clean Power Plan, Obama's EPA. And here's the Clean Power Plan trajectory. And in fact, from 2015, and we've blown right past that. Be careful, this graph has no zero on the y-axis. But we're doing pretty well even without the Clean Power Plan and federal plan. So most of the resources that we talked about are available on the web. I think we're going to send out this slide deck so you can take a look. And if you want to know more, you can click on the links or look at the website. We put at Synapse Energy, we put almost everything we do online for free. So we want people to use it. So I will stop there.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Should I
Very
stop
good.
sharing the screen?
I think you should stop sharing. Yes.
we go.
We have a few questions. There's a couple that relate to the first part about how the electricity demand and use is generated. I will ask you those quickly here. But if people have other questions about how the regulatory system works, how the public utility commissions or public service commissions work, and what we can do to help that system change, we'd love to see them come in. There haven't been too many on your second part yet, so we'll give people a moment to think about that while we ask these two questions. Shaimadas Banerjee talked about replacing coal in developing countries, which isn't easy. Natural gas could be intermediate. We used to talk about gas as a bridge fuel. So now that we've had it for a bridge fuel for 20 years, it's time to be at the other end of the bridge, I think. Should people be going, and should even our utilities in the US be going straight to wind and solar and that kind of thing? That was one question. And then there's a question about how much solar capacity they've added, but how do they deal with the fact that, okay, so the first question is, should everybody in the world, especially the US utilities, go straight to renewables? Then the second question is, when they count in the solar capacity, do they take into account winter capacity being for solar being lower than good?
Okay, yeah. Yes, utilities are investing in and procuring under PPAs electricity from wind and solar now. So we are going. We've been going to renewables last few years in particular, and it's growing quickly, and that's a good thing. I think that the gas part as a bridge is I think at this point, given the kinds of CO2 goals that are being announced and that are required both for the planet and by state law in a lot of places, in significant investments in new gas infrastructure really don't make sense. So the time frame for decarbonizing is tight enough that running some of the existing gas infrastructure for a while, yeah, of course. But that's the operations. I think anything where you're spending significant capital in pipelines or power plants, it just really isn't going to make sense. And even at the home level, we're seeing towns start to say, they don't want to see gas in new buildings for home. And I think that's the leading edge of something that's going to become much more common pretty quickly. So yes. Renewables now, absolutely. I think with the solar capacity and how it's counted, it's a tricky issue. The graphs that I showed have a nameplate. So that's basically the amount of capacity that it can produce under kind of best conditions. Because that's when you're sort of counting up megawatts, that's the typical way to do it. In system planning, however, it's really important to account for the timing and the fluctuations and the weather. And I think so, and by and large, we do. So in the better models with the more, honest and detail-oriented models, they absolutely account for the effective load carrying capability. That is how much these resources that are intermittent contribute to system reliability. We saw recently, I was just reading with the fires in California, that solar production was down from all those rooftop solar panels because it's dark during the day with all the smoke, and you have an eclipse or there's differences in the winter and the summer for sure.
So it's not just that the house is burned down with the solar panels.
So anyway, those are the kind of things that can be taken account in proper utility amounts, and should be in terms of there's some. Well, not so much the fires and the ISOs have to worry about eclipses these days, as it kind of cuts through the swath. But I think that's well within our technical capabilities. For now, with the kind of penetrations of wind and solar on the grid, it's not that big of a problem. You really don't even need much storage to make that work. But over time, as those quantities get to be a bigger and bigger proportion, we're going to need more storage, and we're going to need to get even better at predicting the performance, 3 days, 10 days out, and so on. But that's just a technical problem.
Yeah. So if I could ask you, Bruce, because you towards the end you were pointing out the importance of, well, there's the behavior of the different utilities and the pluses and minuses. Let's put it even handily right there. But the key role of regulators in making things happen, but their limitations given the current way they function or the capabilities, the resources they have. So, one gets the impression of sort of the herding cats kind of phenomena. How do you get 50 states, let's say, with different, not only different utilities, but different regulating bodies to do the best they can? Is it a question of national legislation to make the regulating bodies somehow not just do the local thing? Or is it a question of emulating and highlighting great regulatory examples of things that are really doing a good job? Can you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, so first of all, I'd quibble with the herding cats. I think the utilities are more like elephants or hippos or something. And so the herding, there's just so much inertia there that, it's, and then all of a sudden they'll lunge, the stampede in one direction, and we're using lots of, power. And I think what the utilities are good at, seriously, they're not good at innovation. They're not good at creativity. They're not good at customer service. I don't think they ever will be. those things. But I think they're good at deploying massive amounts of capital, and that's like the gas example, like hundreds of billions of dollars, over just a few years. So there's precedent, and that's what the utilities are good at. And, they're financially stable, and they can do that. In terms of the regulators, are basically key to guiding the utilities and what they do. I don't think there's an easy solution. I mean, the history of, regulation has, regulatory capture, there's some corruption, there's maybe some laziness and just overwhelmed. You get people who weren't in the field at all, in the government. In many states, they're appointed, like in Massachusetts, for example, but other states, they're elected. Either way, you get people who maybe don't have, the experience and the knowledge base to really regulate the utilities well. So I think training commissioners is part of it. I think some maybe thresholds for being a commissioner. It'd be nice if it could be less political, frankly, and more technical. And then I think there's a whole thing about participation. Well, on the education, we have friends at the Regulatory Assistance Project and others who do education of commissioners and provide, training and support. I feel like that's part of what Synapse does, but in the dockets more. So we're in there as witnesses, providing the technical information. So if a commissioner wants to make a good decision, they'll have a record. And we can't be we work in almost all the states, but we're not in every docket. And so there are places where, and we're not the only people who do this, obviously, but I think there are a lot of dockets where commissioners would benefit from having a more complete record and having thoughtful, numbers and modeling and analysis. And I think a lot of it, I think people don't really appreciate in general. And when I say people, I mean, industry people, solar developers, environmentalists, consumer advocates, the idea that this is the place where the decisions are being made. And so it can be boring. Some of the hearings are tedious. It's a real slog. I mean, you need a lawyer, you need experts. There's a lot of procedure, and but it's mostly there for a reason. So honestly, it's a lot of hard work of showing up, doing your homework, and presenting things well. And then sometimes commissioners will hear you.
Sounds like a good area for public interest, sort of transparency focus to kind of keep the lens on folks making the decisions.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do we need a new model for how, who and how the grid is maintained? Should there be a national operator?
Well, it worries me. We have national organizations, right? NARO, and reliability, North American Electric Reliability Organization, and we have big regional organizations. I think there's some benefit to the states as the laboratories of democracy, and you definitely see states going off the rails, and some states doing things well. The same with towns and cities, like municipal power, co-ops. We have a big mix. We have some big public power, TVA, Bonneville in America. And I think it's a big mix. And I think mostly that's good. And you see people trying different things. And if they're learning from each other, that can be positive. And when something really does go off the rails, it's only bankrupting, 30 cities instead of the whole country.
Yeah.
So I think there's a role for federal policy, to be sure, but I think it's more steering, and I think a lot of the things are better left to the states.
Okay, and then there's a question. Oops, where'd it go? So just to get it straight, Herb Zine asked whether the utility executives are just standing in front of the glacier that's coming, or the elephants are getting ready to stampede. Do they have a hidden agenda?
So I think I don't know if it's a hidden agenda. I think there's a inherent tension in their position, right? So I think if you're a utility CEO, these days, you're under a lot of pressure to say things like, I don't want my company to pollute and destroy the planet, right? I want to be part of the transformation. And there's all these nice words that you could say about And some of them do, even, 10, 20 years ago, some of them were saying, we want to be innovators. We want to reduce our carbon emissions and so on. And then then there's the other side of it though, which is there's a lot of focus on near-term profits, and, write-offs are not a happy thing for a CEO, right? And so they've got to worry about their share price, their investors, and they worry a lot about write-offs. So I think they're inherently, caught between, kind of a rock and a hard place. And so I think there is, it's important for them to not undermine democracy and regulation, and, support good policies and so on. And I think there's I think the role for like setting targets to reduce CO2, I think that's pretty squarely with the government, right? I think that's a thing where, international and federal level, and then lower, smaller levels really need to set the goals. Here's what we have to do to save the planet. And then, hey, utilities and private businesses, you work within those constraints and make it happen. And I think that kind of works. So I don't have a view. Actually, back at MIT in the late 70s, I had this idea as I was getting into this field. I thought, naively, someone like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, sitting there, greedy and responsible for all this bad stuff. And what I've learned over 40 years is that it would be great if it were that simple. It's just so like the way the institutions fit together and the financial incentives, there's a lot of inertia, and the problems are really detailed and, complicated and nuanced. And I think the solutions are too. And so, that's,
complex systems are very tough. I mean, you push one piece, and we actually have come to pretty much to the end of time we have for answering questions. We will be posting a question and answer document at our EESN website. I put the EESN website in the answers in the Q&A, which I think you guys can see what answers we've been providing along the way.
Sarah, can you remind, will all registered attendees get a notification about the follow-up Q&As that weren't answered?
I'm not sure. For sure, it'll be on the website. It depends what kind of time we have to put that together, which actually is a good segue to the fact that all of you alums who are so interested and concerned about these issues and how they intersect, and what we can do with our alumni voice, which is, we're the, I won't call it the priests of high science, but we are the people who can be trusted by a lot of the population. So together, when we say something, we can make quite a difference. So EESN is working to make groups like that. We have a group called the MIT Alumni for Climate Action, who is speaking to different decision makers, policy makers we've elected officials. We are running these monthly webinars. We have a group of people talking to each other from around the world, called our ambassadors. If you're interested in being an ambassador, please write to us, alumnienergy@mit.edu. We also have two things coming up in the next month. The Alumni Leadership Conference, which is for the alumni volunteers, is online this year, and we're hoping that a lot of people who haven't before volunteered as class presidents or fundraisers, or educational counselors will attend some of the sessions of the Alumni Leadership Conference. On Saturday afternoon, the 26th at 2 o'clock, EESN is having a discussion to talk about EESN. Again, I will put more information on that is in the program, in the agenda for the Alumni Leadership Conference, but I'll also put something on our website. So we hope that, if you want to continue some of these discussions, we can talk about it either there in an hour, and then next month our meeting time is going to be a workshop about what we can do. Who's interested in helping with various things that get our alumni voice together.
And we're always looking for suggestions for good guests like Bruce for webinars in the future, alums that are doing valuable, interesting things. So if you have some ideas for topics and guests, let us know.
Thank you.
And don't forget the Energy Nerd Show and Tell show.
So thank you all very much. We've come to our hour, and we appreciate you joining us, all 70 of you, and we will hopefully see you again at another webinar. We will also have your questions and answers on the website. Bye.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.